Welcome everybody, Master the World. Today we're going to cover 143A. And I believe, Maddie, you're going to kick us off with the very first wine.
I am wine number one. And the appearance on this is totally intriguing, but I am reminding myself to review these questions that are up there in case you want something to have your mind hold on to. And I mentioned the wine's acidity, characterizing it. And we all have different perception levels and tolerances for acidity. So it's good to get to know yours. Defining the fruit. Tart, just ripe, even overripe, moving into confected or jammy. And then finally the texture. I think a wine can have prominent acidity and still have a smooth texture, so hold that thought. So back to the color, which I was remarking to myself is extraordinary. It's a very deep yellow moving into gold tones with a tinge of orange. It is not what I would call star bright. It is slightly muted, though it certainly looks healthy. It's bright enough. The wine moves with a little bit of amplitude, heaviness in the glass. And there certainly are no green tinges whatsoever. So, you know, looking at it, it's leading me to contemplate possible aerobic winemaking and or barrel and bottle age. So hold that thought. But again, we don't make decisions. We just take a look and hold the thought. So aromatically, it's a lot of fun. It's very generous. It's quite ripe, and it leads with citrus to my perception, and with ripe citrus. So orange, mandarin, Meyer lemon, and also right on the heels of that, tropical fruit. Star fruit, guava, not so much pineapple, very ripe, moving into overripe tree fruit, specifically yellow apple and quince, and stone fruit as well, super ripe apricot peach. There is a very specific florality to this wine. Is there a word, you know, floral-like? I don't know if florality is actually a word.
Actually, florality is a word. You can use it. I checked.
Yay, because I use it all the time. So I'm glad I wasn't butchering something. And to me, it's not so much citrus blossom as a little bit more poignant than that. Maybe magnolia.
Maddie, I think we lost your audio there. Did something happen?
No.
Evan, oh, there we go. You're back.
Okay, I plugged. Can you hear me now?
30 seconds.
All righty, sorry about that. So I think the last thing I was talking about was the exotic aromatics to this wine, and that the florality was like magnolia or you know, fresh roses. There is an oxidative touch that very curious to see if it will be confirmed on the palate, because it doesn't come across like a problem or a red flag. Other waves, we have a little bit of ginger root, aromatic chamomile, sweet herbs like basil. I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate and see if these are being reflected. The first attack is very interesting because mid-palate, all of that ripe apricot, sweet citrus, tropical fruit is reflected, but then after I swallow a little and spit, acidity does soar in. It's not what I would call high, possibly medium plus, maybe edging closer towards medium, but I'm going to take another sip immediately. So it is refreshing. The aromatics hadn't led me to that And it is also slightly oxidative on the palate. There is a very interesting reflection of it in the form of marzipan and sweet nuts like cashew. There is a little bit of an illusion of sweetness in the form of sesame candy. And I didn't get this much on the nose, but on the palate, I'm getting a strong evidence of salinity to it. So, you know, the lovely phrase, the inorganic minerality, but in the form of an actual saltiness, a depth of flavor that to me speaks to Lee's contact, and possibly old vines, the concentration of it. It's a very exotic wine. It is rich. It is actually, even with the gently mouth-watering acidity, it's got a thickness, a satiny texture to it, and almost waxy. It is wildly intriguing. Oh, oak, I didn't mention. I don't perceive any oak, though you might be getting a little bit of an illusion of sweetness in the form of vanilla or sweet baking spices, but I don't think it speaks to wood. I think it speaks to the quality of this specific exotic tasting wine.
Maddie,
Please
just
go
to answer one question,
Mhm.
I think we have some newcomers on our webinar today, which is a great welcome. And there was a question about what is the tasting protocol here? And if it feels like Madeline is going through some sort of steps and you're not sure what the steps are, you can actually go to our website where there is a button called Start Tasting. And we have a grid that you can use, starting with the sight, then the aromas, and then your taste, and then the structure. So that's the format that Madeline is following. And she's giving you that feedback as she's going through the format. So if you're not very familiar with it, I would really recommend that you go to the full workout mode of the Start Tasting, type in the kit number, and that is what Madeline is going through. And these questions, Madeline, you would say, just help you sort of direct you in sort of an understanding of the questions to ask yourself.
What questions, Lee May? I don't understand.
These three questions that you have, how are they different from the
Oh,
grid?
yes, sorry about that. This is just to help direct you. Because, you know, sometimes, especially if you're new to this methodology, and or you might even want to call it game, because we like to be playful about it and not tense. In my estimation, these three questions really speak to a wine's texture and structure. And I think particularly when we get into deductive reasoning or assessment even of quality, they're important. Also, when I taste, sometimes I will focus heavily on the nose and then move to the palate. Sometimes I will do them both sort of as one-stop shopping. It really depends on how the wine is showing. But when you see the descriptions on the website, they apply to both aromatics and to taste. By the way, I can still taste this wine. It has a very long finish. The complexity is high. And just to, you know, backtrack a little bit, my overview on this is that this is a ripe, rich, soft, but refreshing at the same time. White wine with touches of attractive oxidation, interesting, an illusion of sweetness in the form of soft nuts and honey, ripe citrus, orange related. It's rich, it's smooth, and I do know what it is, but at this moment where I'd be very intrigued to find out. It is long, and it does have a pronounced inorganic minerality in the form of saltiness, particularly in the finish. And it finishes very clean and refreshing. So that said.
There's a question here on the baking spice from Judy.
Mhm.
Do you think, Maddie, that the baking spice that people are getting in here is from oxidation?
I think baking spice to me is usually wood related, but I think in this particular case, I don't think it's oxidation. I think the nuttiness is more oxidation. I think the baking spice is just that illusion of sweetness. And I'd probably be better off calling it more of sort of a combination of, ginger root, that type of thing. There's not so much vanilla as you would commonly associate with exposure to wood. And grape variety, well, we've got a pretty interesting option here in Antaubage. Did I say that okay?
Well done. Well done.
Thank you. I see I want to speak Portuguese, that's a grape variety, if you're not familiar with it, that dominates Alentejo in Portugal. Chardonnay, and we know that's a great world traveler, and Chenin Blanc. And then we have the regions of Portugal, France, and California, and South Africa for Chardonnay, and Chenin certainly for South Africa and France. In looking at the three grapes for a moment, go back to the structure as we talked about initially. Certainly Chenin and Chardonnay are known for having firm, even aggressive acidity levels. Chardonnay is considered, it always sounds a little insulting when we say this, but more of a neutral grape variety, or one that is not naturally highly aromatic. Chenin Blanc is semi to highly aromatic, depending on what expression you're experiencing. And Antaubage is grown in a warm growing region, and it can verge on acid deficiency, in which case it is often, or regularly, I should say, blended with other grapes that have spunkier acidity. So there you have it. And by the way, for those of you who are looking at this list going, oh my, am I going to have to know this Portuguese white grape in blind tasting at the certified level for the Court of Master Sommeliers? I would say with a resounding no, but we don't taste just for those purposes. We also taste for exploratory purposes and discovering wines that are up and coming and worth paying attention to, even though they may not be called classic.
Yeah. Maddie, there's a question here, and I just want to encourage everyone. This is the first one out the gate. You've got three options. You have a 33% chance if you picked one of the other ones, not the other. So please don't be shy. It's anonymous. Put your stake in the ground. In the meantime, we have a good question here from Deepu. If you're not seeing the poll, just move your screens around a little bit. It is on there. I guarantee you might need to move your shared screen, panel screen, and see if it's hidden behind. The poll is still open right now. It is still out. In the meantime, there's a question here from Deepu that says, I got all the stone fruit and ripeness you mentioned, but on the palate, the saltiness and the acidity was drowning out some of the ripe fruit. Any comment on why this would be?
It could be because the wine is young. Even though we're getting oxidative notes aromatically on it, that could be part of the winemaking process. So, we'll see when we reveal, but that's a very focused assessment. Thank you, Deepu. So I'm not giving you a definitive answer, but also don't forget that often a wine can be very balanced between the aroma, the flavor, and the finish, but that doesn't always speak to quality. It can be imbalanced in a positive way as well. So the nose and the palate don't have to mirror each other exactly. So I think Chardonnay can you pull that back up and up?
I'm going to actually relaunch the poll because a bunch of people are saying that they could not do it. I just relaunched a poll. I'm hoping some of the folks who said that they couldn't access Devika and Bill or Connor, can you tell me if you're able? Okay, great. Excellent. All right. Oh my goodness. I was wondering what happened to the 20% only who were answering the poll. Excellent, people.
Scary wine. Delicious wine.
Oh no, it's very delicious. It's very intriguing. And just to, please do weigh in. And if you feel it's another, say so, and then put it if you feel like it in the chat room. This is a safe zone. It's a very friendly zone. Nobody's going to point fingers. It's we're all elevating ourselves together.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I'm just gonna give it like 10 more seconds so that you can get your last vote in, and then I'm gonna share the results of the poll, and then we can go from there.
And I'm
And
still getting length and salinity, which is really exciting. Now, here we go. Poor Chardonnay. I was feeling sorry for it for a moment. So we have a 44% with Antau Bash. Chardonnay, Chenin, get good hat tips. And whoever said other, I'd love to know what you think it is. And California has been cut out of this. So obviously a strong showing for Portugal, but equal for France, so that Chardonnay and Chenin could come from France. But we're also remembering that South Africa has stunning old vine Chenin Blanc. Okay.
Yeah. So let's go to.
Somebody mentioned Pinot Gris. I think that's an intriguing thing to consider, by the way. Bravo, Jerry.
All right, let's see where we're going, starting with the Bay Area, of course.
Yes, I am now, thanks to Master of the World, I'm now addicted to Google Earth, and only, I play with the speed of it a little bit. We're leaving Evan's home, I think.
Yeah.
Or,
See how cold it is on
Maddie,
that fog?
while we're traveling, we have a couple of people who said Pinot Gris. What do you think of that call?
Yes, I mentioned that, and I also complimented it. I think because I think that Pinot Gris can have moderate to even low levels of acidity. So I thought that was a neat option. Bravo. And then here we are in Iberia, we are in Portugal, we are in Alentejo. Hopefully I'm not slaughtering that, which takes up 1/3 of the country in the southeast. We're in very high quality, albeit young producer, founded about 20 years ago, called Herdade do Rocima. I hope I said that nicely, Evan. And we are actually in a very specific region in the south. We have some altitude here, but what's really interesting about Alentejo in general is that we have a very warm, very dry climate. And this particular grape variety is one that has adapted and actually suits this area perfectly. This is also a region in terms of its micro and macro climate that is dry. Yay, that's always a positive. And it is moderated in the south by a little bit of a wind tunnel effect, right, Evan, with winds coming in
From the coast.
From the coast, from the Atlantic. This is actually, if we can, you can see I can't pronounce the name of the town, I might, Vidigueira. Vidigueira and Cuba. So those are the two towns that are near each other, which is where this wine is made. This is amphora wine, Alentejo DOC, Vino Branco, white wine. They could actually claim a specific term that doesn't appear on this label, Talias, which refers to amphora and is legally controlled, as I understand it. So a modern winery. And this region, thanks to you, Evan, I was lucky enough to go. You have vast expanses. You have a lot of modern wine production, but respecting the native varieties, of which this is one. I find this wine utterly and completely intriguing, and I'm going to encourage everyone to go to their website. They have a 2-page description of how they make their amphora wine. So, over 2,000 years ago, here is the co-owner and winemaker. There are the amphoras, because his are not kept underground. He keeps them above ground. He actually, it was the Romans who introduced amphora specifically to Alentejo over 2,000 years ago in this area. And there they're called the Talias, not amphora. It is such a developed culture there that there's a Talia wine festival and amphora wine competition, which is really extraordinary in my mind's eye. And these folks claim to be the first Portuguese estate to make traditional, authentic amphora wine, but then bottle it for sale. They, do the traditional lining, the clay pots with beeswax and olive oil. They have old, beautiful olive trees on the estate. And I'm going to read something because this is beautifully and simply explained. Everything goes into the amphora: the grapes, the skins, the stems, everything is stirred 3 or 4 times a day. After mellow, the skins and the stems sink to the bottom of the amphora and they lay there for 6 months. There's no lid on this thing. So Pedro puts a layer of his olive oil on the top as a natural protectant. And when he's ready to bottle, there's a small tap at the bottom of the amphora, and the wine trickles through the skins and the stems, which he claims naturally filter the wine. So I think the freshness and the minerality combined with that touch of cheerful oxidation and very ripe tropical fruit is a reflection of a wine that is so singular and understandably pretty sexy at the moment in the trade. Wouldn't my colleagues agree?
Absolutely. No, and you did the wine such justice in your
Oh, good. I'm glad
description.
Pedro's not annoyed
Pedro would
with
be,
me.
he would be thrilled, I'm sure. I hope he listens. I invited him to come. I hope he listens to it down the road. But this wine I think is an important thing in that, no, people are not going to probably test you on amphora wines and Talia wines, but they're becoming incredibly popular, whether it's from Georgia, whether it's from Portugal, whether it's from Italy, whether it's from America. There's people making amphora wines in Washington, California, everywhere. So this is a category that you should be at least familiarizing yourself with. I think this one's a particularly good one. I love the fact that they've embraced the traditions, literally the skin of the olive oil floating on the top, the pulling the wine through the spigot at the bottom are old techniques that are being revitalized. So would you be examined on this wine? No. Should you be aware of it in the context of what it is in the world today? Absolutely, because
would
it's more
I
and more
use it
seminal.
on an event with neat food? Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Mhm.
One last question before we go, and to catch up. It says here from Kevin, it's very warm and not so alcoholic. In fact, somebody else Bill pointed out, it's a 12% on the label. Very warm, not alcoholic. Is that due to decisions in the winery, or is that just the way amphora is made? Low alcohol.
It's actually where this where the vines are coming from, because this is a relatively, as Alentejo goes, as I understand it, this is a relatively moderate growing region because of the effect of the altitude in the south, and there's equal altitude in the north as well of this region, and the effect of the maritime influence from the Atlantic. So, maybe our mind's eye expects heat, but it certainly isn't reflected in this wine. And I don't think they're doing anything cunning, like AKA de-alcoholizing. I just think it's the way the wine is naturally showing.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's an area I would just say it's an area that's south. It's the furthest south part of the Alentejo, yet it's also the area most known for whites. So because of this, and specifically for the Antanvaish, because of this sort of combination of thermal amplitude from altitude, but as well as the cooling influence that's there, elongates the season. It still gets awfully warm. I mean, don't overlook that, but it does that. And then again, there's just that whole context of doing it in clay, amphora/Talia, and just for people who are deep diving down the rabbit hole, Vino d'Italia, which is a style of wine, has specific laws and regulations around it. And if you move outside of it just a little bit in terms of the composition of the way you put the fruit in the whatever the types of things you use, you can also just call it amphora wine. D'Italia has a very specific definition.
Thank you for including it in the skit, Evan. Yay.
Fun stuff. All right, Should we move on to wine two? All right, now for something, if you look at it right off the bat next to wine one, you can tell that these are going to be very different wines. Contextually, just because of the visuals, you don't have the deepness, you don't have the darkening. As we know, white wines do get older. As they get older, they pick up color as they spend time in certain vessels, most notably barrels. They can pick up color, but with the color being more in sort of a straw element rather than that sort of golden yellow pushing the golden Madeline talked about before, you can tell that the lifestyle choices of this wine, appropriate during Pride Week and Pride Month, are a little bit different. I'm not going to spend too much time there. As you're analyzing wines, we look at the appearance, we spend time in the nose and the mouth, and when we make structural judgments on it, but you shouldn't overthink the appearance there. Just take a quick cursory glance. It's usually going to tell you about age, and it's usually going to tell you if there's something wrong in the wine, if your wine's all cloudy, if there's sea monkeys in it or whatever going on there. You don't want to worry about it. Thank you for laughing, Tim. Let's spend our times in the nose. I always talk about wines having Three components, that being of a fruit character, an earth character, and a wood character. Everything coming out of the ground being fruit, so that's herbs, greens, veggies, fruits, etc. Earth coming from the land, if you will, inorganic or organic earth, and then wood, of course, coming from any sort of form of oak or wood, because it could be acacia, it could be chestnut, or whatever, dependent. So when I smell this wine right off the bat, I am getting sort of a fairly fruit dominant wine. So here, I am like Madeline, I'm in the citrus range realm of things, but I'm not quite as ripe as hers. I'm getting lemon, and it is sort of riper. I mean, you once get that kind of eureka lemon thing, but I'm also getting lemon curd, the sweetness of Meyer lemon, which is of course half lemon and half orange. A little bit of mandarin, not quite as ripe as orange, but that's there. And then a little bit of tree fruit too, perhaps some yellow plums, maybe a little bit of tropicality. I like the star fruit comment that Madeline raised earlier. I think that would be a good one here. Maybe a bit of stone fruit too, maybe a little bit of peach, white, maybe yellow, maybe just fresh, not super ripe, but it's all there. But there's a lot of fruit going on here. In the world of other things, there's other herbs and stuff going on. I'm picking up some green elements in this wine, but sort of again on the sort of sweeter side. So maybe a little bit of verbena, maybe a little bit of green olive character, but not briny, just the olive fruit itself. Picking up a little bit of lime and lemon blossomy sorts of things going on. There's definitely a floral character here. And again, sort of a sweet herb thing, not anything super quote unquote pyrozinic or green peppery or bell peppery or anything like that, but definitely still on the green side. Earthiness, a little bit perhaps of just freshly turned dirt, but nothing that I would say is like mineral or rock or saline or slate or flint or anything like that. And yeah, I mean, there could be, anything in that sort of grassy herbal vein, but not sort of super bell peppery pyrozinic. And as far as wood goes, I think there's wood here, but I don't think the wood is like small, brand new French barrique. I do get it as sort of a nice soft note. It lifts a little bit of the, again, a sort of sweeter element at the top, but it's not overly dominant. I think it's a little bit more on the kind of rounder side, adding some texture, adding some flavor, probably accentuated by batonnage a little bit. So that's what we're going there. I just want to validate it now. I always smell first. Your nose is a much more powerful tool than your mouth. So definitely exhaust the nose before you throw the wine into your mouth. And I'm going to do that now.
And Evan, do you get any mint at all? Jerry's asking if you got some mint.
Again, I'm saying there's green elements here. How those green elements present themselves are going to be different from everybody. If it is a mint, it's a very subtle mint, maybe more of a lemon mint, maybe not spearmint or peppermint or something like that. The mint family is a very large one. But I think what's most importantly, whether you're calling it a soft grassiness, whether you're calling it an herbal character, whether you're calling it a green olive character, like those Pavestrano olives that you get from Italy or whatever, there is something, for lack of better words, just green. And I think that's important and part of that particular style of what's going on here. The fruit nature, somebody mentioned a tangerine character before. Yeah, again, in that sort of vein, just not as ripe as orange. What's interesting here is I'm getting a sort of mirrored or echoed effect, which is sort of amplifying all the things I picked up in the nose. They're pretty consistent there, not a lot more there. Again, still no strong sense of earthiness whatsoever. And between that really ripe forward character and all that, that's something I'm focusing in on and putting in my head. As far as the structural elements of the wine is clearly dry, but the fruit is ripe. Once again, is this wine dry or fruity, or is it sweet? So this wine is a dry wine. It's a fruit forward wine, but it's not a sweet wine. Okay. And as been talking about before, it really is more these sweet citric elements rather than the tree fruits, although there's definitely a little bit of tree fruit there. Now, acid level on this wine, reasonably good. I would say it's probably a moderate plus, if anything, swinging a little bit towards you. There's a bit of a prickle there, maybe a touch of a little bit high, but I'd say it's probably a solid medium plus. The texture on it is far from lean. This is round. It's definitely smooth. It's got wonderful texture to it. The length on it is pretty long. It's subtle, but it's long. I mean, I can still taste it, and it's still sort of expanding in the back of my palate. It's not what I would call phenolic, which could happen if you practiced a lot of skin contact with your wine. It would give you sort of a stringent bitter character, and I'm not finding that here whatsoever. And then, of course, it's dry, and the wood, as I said before, is more of an accent character. There is much about the texture. Wines that have spent time in wood do pick up texture and roundness to them, and that. and it's a delicious wine, but and very different than the first wine too, and certainly without that crisp bite that the other wine had down there. And also the richness and the texture and the weight of the wine suggest a wine that's coming from albeit probably warmer climate, probably not warmer. It's hard to be warmer than that part of the world. Nevertheless, sort of a richer, fuller style with higher alcohol by volume, texturally being more like cream if the first wine was sort of more like 2% milk or something. Le voila, that's what I got.
Okay.
So it's interesting. If we pull up the poll now, let's take a look at what do we got for choices here. So our choices could be Albarino or Alvarinho, and we're familiar with that particular grape from both Spain and Portugal. Albarino on the Spanish side, Alvarinho is a blend on the Portuguese side, and that can have a lot of the stone fruit thing. I wouldn't say it's necessarily always as rich and round as what you see before, and the acid levels tend to be quite high in these wines. And anyway, that's what's going on there. Grüne Veltliner, our friends from Austria and other parts of the world, is known for having that sort of carawayed, radishy, white peppery character, again, sort of tree fruits and stuff like that, sort of semi-aromatic, closer to Riesling than not. Sauvignon Blanc or a blend. Well, Sauvignon Blanc depends on where it's done, how it's done, whether it's a single variety or whether it's a blend. And then there are, of course, all those players in between. Austria, of course, is the association for Grüner Veltliner. Spain does Albarino. It also does really good Sauvignon Blanc in the fan of this. So don't sort of think we're all doing one-trick ponies. California, of course, does everything and anything under the sun, so always a safe choice. And then Chile would be doing Sauvignon Blanc. They're one of the largest Sauvignon Blanc producers in the world, both in a pure style and in a blended style. So you got a couple of choices there. I think people seem to be landing in two different camps there, landing more in one than the other. And then a few people are waiting to vote. Nobody's name's on this. You go no attribution whatsoever, and anything that we don't talk about can give us a little bit of conversational piece. So nice to see some
I'm
other
going to
stuff
give
going in.
10 more seconds. And if the choice that you wanted isn't on here, then you're falling into the other camp. Feel free to throw out what other region, what other varieties, so that we could use it as a really good teaching point for everybody else as well. So I see an other here in region. So if you've got an other there, let us know what it is. And I'm about to close the poll. So the rest of you, 30% of you have not voted yet.
You're
Please
still
do
scared
so
after the
now.
Anton Weiss. Don't
Please
need to
do
be.
so
This
now.
is about fun, guys.
Yep.
Nobody's grading you, and the guy upstairs isn't keeping score. Just remember that. All right, so it looks like our winner here is Sauvignon Blanc, and perhaps Sauvignon Blanc is a blend. That's sort of a good, solid choice. If we were going to go in the Albarino versus Alvarinho camp, what I would tell you is that most of the Portuguese versions of it, the Alvarinho, some of which are blended with other grapes like Fechadura, Loureiro, and things like that, tend to not be as full-bodied as this and tend to have even more shrill levels of acidity than this. So this would definitely be in the Spanish camp. Grüne Veltliner for me, probably a little bit more understated and a little bit leaner. It's very rare that you find a Grüne Veltliner with as much roundness and texture as something like this, particularly in the older world. And I'm not screaming down to see where we are. Here we go. Spain, of course, would be Albarino. California and Chile sort of be winning out. It looks like one or the other for the other. And then somebody's picking some other territory. We'd be interested to know where that is. And then we can find out where we go.
Yeah. All right. So Evan, here's a comment as I'm pulling up the tour. It says here that I had a surprising Wiener Vert last night and had some Lee stirring. That's very different. What do you think about a Wiener Vert for something like this?
For me, even with Lee stirring, even with Batronage, Alvarinho and Alvarinho blends are not going to get this round. I've been drinking Portuguese Minho wines and Vinho Verde wines for a long time, and they're at best round, but they're rarely as, for lack of better words, creamy and textured as this wine is. So although I guess you could do that, that would probably be a bit out of character. Although there are certainly people making all kinds of wines there. So definitely variation. Absolutely, there's definitely variations on that, and there are going to be people who are doing that. I was just with a bunch of Rhone producers this week, and there were Rhone producers that were making natural style Grenache wines that tasted anything like southern France. So we're back in California. And we are up in the Napa Valley of all places, just south of St. Helena, sort of straddling the highway a little bit, and at the Crocker and Star Winery. And Crocker and Star Winery is a wonderful combined winery of Charlie Crocker and Pam Starr, two veterans of the California wine industry. What's interesting about this wine, and there they are. See, they're in they've actually got a little winery now, a little tasting room off the winery and all that, just in town, just outside the town of St. Helena. And they do a really good job. As I said before, this wine, when we hit the next slide, you'll see that we're 100% Sauvignon Blanc. So what's interesting is twofold. One, the Sauvignon Blanc that you're going to have in Napa tends to be less pyrrhizinic and more citric. So Northern California, both Sonoma County and Napa Valley, tend to be more citric than the far south, which tends to be definitely more herbal, green, and pyrrhizinic in Santa Barbara, Santa Rita, places like that where they might grow it. Monterey even can be a little bit more that way, and certainly if you find it in Northern Mendocino County, but there it's more citric. So what you're not going to find there is jalapenos and bell peppers and stuff like that. Pam Starr, who was the winemaker there, has been there since 1997. And Pam, prior to that, was the winemaker at Spotswood Winery. So if you're familiar with Spotswood Winery, you know that they do Bordelais varieties, specifically Cabernet and Sauvignon Blanc. And their Sauvignon Blanc, albeit pure as 100%, is still a toast tip of the beret, if you will, to what they're doing down in the Grave region with that texture, with that lees stirring, et cetera. It's a combination of oak, cement eggs, and a little bit of stainless steel. So you want to preserve the acidity on it. And it's definitely more of an understated style, which I personally like. And I think that it's sort of a lovely just example of what's going on with restraint in Napa Valley when it's done well. Charlie Crocker owns the vineyard. They met because Pam used to buy fruit from him at Spotswood for their own Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc there. They became fast friends, and literally over a 3-hour lunch, they shook their hands and decided to start making wine together. Pam was at Spotswood for 6 years before starting this. The estate itself is, as I said before, in southern St. Helena. It's about 115 acres, planted fruit on 122. Total, and again, just a lovely style, really
Okay.
proud.
Evan, two questions. One is distinguishing this from a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So got the Sauvignon Blanc, but also got some kiwi on the nose and thought that it was New Zealand. What do you think of that?
New Zealand's tends to be, it depends where in New Zealand. If you were in Hawke's Bay in New Zealand, it would be more like this. But most everything we get from New Zealand tends to be from Marlborough. And Marlborough tends to be a bit more brash, a bit more green, a little bit more pyrrhizinic, a little bit more gooseberry, a little bit more elderflower, and a little bit more in your face. The volume is louder on the volume side there, and this is definitely understated. So that Chile can be that way as well too, which is at times why Chile and New Zealand get confusing, but Chile's tend to be even greener, a little bit more herbal, whereas they tend to be a bit more gooseberry and sort of elderflowery over in New Zealand.
Great. And I got this too, and 2 other people got this, which is this bitterness. You know, do you feel that this bitterness is something that is hard to get past? And Bill says because of the bitterness, he thought that it was an Alvarinho. What do you think of this bitterness? Are you getting it?
I'm not getting a ton of bitterness. There's a touch of phenolic, and Sauvignon Blanc is a grape where people, in fact, the person who sort of essentially invented skin contact in the modern age, macération particulière, was Denis Dubourdieu down in the region of Bordeaux. So this is something that is done with Sauvignon Blanc somewhat. I would suggest that the perception here of picking it up is correct. I don't think it's excessive. Sauvignon is a wine that will pick up, and the fruit can get accentuated when you do some skin contact, but I think it's very, very limited. This is Julie Robertson. She's actually the day-to-day winemaker. Pam kicked herself upstairs. It's her winery. She can do whatever she wants, but she is very, very involved there. Julie's been working there for several years and is just a really talented winemaker. Not only do they make really great Sauvignon Blanc, but their Cab Franc is just rock and roll. I just love what they do there. So
great. Evan, just a parting shot on this. If you were to sum it up for Deepu here, what were the key markers that made this Sauvignon Blanc in your
Yeah,
mind?
well, the Sauvignon Blanc thing is again that sort of greenness, that lightly herbal character in concert with sort of a high acid quality of fruit, most normally all of which is usually going to be citric. What gives it to me as being sort of Northern California, Napa Valley, is the fact that it is citrus dominated and it is not green dominated. There are green elements there, but if I see green elements in the forefront, I'm usually going to steer away from Northern California and go either to New Zealand Marlborough, Chile, Casablanca, Aconcagua in general, or even perhaps parts of South Africa.
Excellent. All right, Tim, we got to you.
Yes. All right, before we get started on wine number 3, a couple quick thoughts. Number 1, don't let a single fruit, i.e. kiwi here, take you to any one grape or wine, okay? It's not enough. It's just not enough. Quality of the fruit, yeah. Like if you detect dried fruit for an Amarone or you detect botrytis fruit for any number of wines, cool. But apple or lemon or whatever are not enough to take you to a grape or wine. Number 2, little reality check. Those of you that thought the Sauvignon Blanc was bitter, go back and retaste wine number 1 and think about the fact that it was on the skins for 6 months. If you want phenolic bitterness, wine number 1 is bitter, okay? And not only that, the acid is high. It's a really curious wine, okay? All right, let's dive into red wines. And this is wine number 3. Take a look at our questions. What does the depth of color tell you about the potential grape variety that the wine was made from? Yes. Number 2, what does the tannin level tell you about the possible grape? That's important. And then putting those two things together along with the alcohol level, the fruit ripeness, what kind of climate were the grapes grown in and the wine was made in, okay? All right, so let's get started. Getting first to the color, the appearance is important thing is that this is, I wouldn't say translucent, but this is a medium ruby, true red, and it's clear, you can see through it. Yeah, you can almost read through it. And it lightens up to a really pretty lighter ruby red rose color at the rim, still youthful, probably 3 or 4 years old. And what else about it? It doesn't stain the glass, and the tears legs, Marangoni La-di-da are medium at best. Okay. And then on the nose, and when I talk about fruit in red wines, I like to go with color first. So color is a category. Red fruit dominates this wine, both in the nose and palate. And so that if you extrapolate that to the climate, then it's probably going to be a cooler climate, because that means the fruit didn't get very ripe. But what we have here are really classic red raspberry, underripe strawberry, sour cherry, cranberry, things like that. There's a touch of dark fruit, especially on the nose, not so much the palate. And what there is things like blackberry and black raspberry. So there's black fruit that's really acidic. So it's all fresh and tart and just barely right. What else? There's a little bit of orange and mandarin teal, which is really pretty, along with the rose petal, your nose above the glass, maybe a little hibiscus. And then there are definitely savory type herbs. So there's tea, almost bergamot, a little star anise. There's bay laurel, even a little verbena, a little citrusy note. There's mushrooms. And yeah, so there's this, confluence of green type things, but not overwhelming. And then for earth and mineral, it's definitely there, but it doesn't really drive the wine. The fruit drives the wine. But there's definitely a mushroomy earth quality, and then there's a mineral type quality. In terms of the oak, it is low usage of new oak, maybe 10%, if that, maybe 15%. And then there's light spice. There's things like cashew nut, walnut. And then in terms of winemaking, there is some whole cluster, partial whole cluster, because in the palate, when you taste it, there's definitely some stem tannin. So I'm going to taste that real quickly. So not surprisingly, what the wine as a trend does from the nose and the palate generally is the fruit turns tart. Even the dark fruit turns tartar, red fruit even tartar. The savory elements come up, the tea, the bergamot, the orange peel. The wine is earthy, but again, the fruit really drives it. The oak makes itself known as a really light spice and kind of a smoke and toast quality on the finish. In terms of structure, the wine is dry. The acid is medium plus. If you need a reality check for acid, again, go back and taste wine 1. That's high acid. Okay, at least it was to me today. The alcohol, if I say, oh, and inhale, is medium at best. I get heat right up in here and it doesn't go down further, and it's really not very strong. And in connecting the dots, it shouldn't be strong because, again, the fruit is really tart and the acid is really kind of elevated. Okay, the tannin, though, is very supple, soft, and moderate. Okay, and that should help in identifying the grape variety from which the wine was made. The finish is medium plus, and the complexity is medium plus and beyond. And I think more than anything, it's just really seamless, and the balance is wonderful. It's really a complete wine and really well made. What occurs to me also is that this is a cooler climate with a longer growing season because you've got tart fruit, but it did get completely ripe, and you only get that in a place where the growing season is long. Okay. All right, Lee Meng.
All right.
Hello, please.
Launch this poll.
There we are. So your choices here, when you vote, are a Grenache and blend Pinot Noir, a Tempranillo and blend, and then if you want to go rogue, and I encourage you to do that, if your spirit takes you there, go other. Okay. Possible countries, obviously, if you're going to vote for Tempranillo and blend, Spain is a good call. Grenache, blend, or Pinot Noir could be France, if you're going to go to the old world. Chile, definitely, if you're going to go for Pinot Noir. Some lovely Pinot Noirs made there. And then also New Zealand, of course, South Island, places like Central Otago. Yeah, wonderful Pinot Noirs. All right, so vote, and then we will discuss.
I'm going to see if there are any questions here.
It's interesting to point out that there are some today compared to, say, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, aside from the fact that within Chile, Pinots are much better than they were back then. There's some really cool Grenaches being made down there now, too.
Yep.
So that would be an interesting.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
All right. So 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3.
I love it.
2,
People are voting. Our
1.
numbers are going up. Yay.
Yeah.
Vote, people,
Maybe
vote.
their
Yeah.
confidence is back after 2 white wines. All
Let's
right.
have always the
All right.
reds. Always the reds.
So here we go. The results are in, and the structure doesn't lie. Okay, so not many people went for Grenache, and that's probably because the alcohol was just so moderate. Tannins, it lacked a lot of the savory and peppery qualities you would expect. And then especially if it was from the Southern Rhone, it would be both stony and earthy and mushroomy, and it would be much bigger, richer wine and more tannic. Tempranillo blend, not too many. And then everybody went for Pinot Noir, and they went for Chile or France. And so the question there is, how earthy is the wine? And what drove the wine? And I made a point of saying that the fruit drove the wine twice. Okay. All right. So
Tim, the process of elimination gets us, from what you just said, out of the old world into the new world. But
Yep.
even within the new world, we're at 35% Chile, 35% New Zealand.
yeah, and those of you who've been with us in the past, and we've had not Chilean Pinot Noirs, but we've had New Zealand Pinot Noirs, and they've had a pronounced herbal quality, So that's all I will say there. Let's, get on the Starship Master the World.
I love that Starship.
Yeah, that's in which case this is kind of like, the Starship version 1.0, because we already should be there if it was a Starship. But we're going to go to the Antipodes, to the Southern Hemisphere, and we're going to go to Chile. And I remember that, the first time I went to Chile in 2000, Evan, to your point, tasting Pinot Noirs and going, wow, these need some work. And at the time, thinking that Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay were really ahead of the curve and were really lovely wines, and the Pinot Noirs, which is stemmy and young and lacked fruit and depth. And frankly, the reason is because the vines weren't very old. I think as much as any grape variety, Pinot Noir, the vines need some time. And if you think about New Zealand for a second, that's especially true, because when Central Otago Pinot Noirs got all the press, 15, 20 years ago, people say there's great potential, and the potential they were talking about meant the vines had to get old. And here, the same story. This is the Kingston Family Vineyards, located about 12 miles from the Pacific.
Look at the clouds.
What's that?
Look at the clouds.
Look at the clouds.
Yeah, look at the clouds. And I will tell you, you know, this place for a long time has been called the Casablanca. Casablanca has been called the Carneros of Chile, and it's absolutely true. It looks very much like it. It has the same fog patterns that the Carneros has. And the winery has only been around since the 1990s. The estate was founded in Madeline. This is just for you. There was a guy named Carl J. Kingston, and he was from the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And he and his wife in 1906 decided to go to Chile for the gold rush, right? And I can only imagine how long it took them to get there, right? My God, probably 6 months or something like that. But anyway, instead of finding gold, they fell in love with the place and they bought a cattle ranch in the current site of where the winery is. And forever and a day, as in 5 generations, it was a cattle ranch. But finally, you know, the great-great-granddaughter, Carolyn, who was going to Stanford for grad school, drew up a business plan to grow grapes and to make wine. And so that's how the winery was born. They specialize in Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but they also make Sauvignon Blanc and Syrah.
Wow.
The Tobias, which is this particular wine, is a blend from several different parcels on the estate. And you can see it's an absolutely beautiful place.
Wow, that's gorgeous.
You know,
Really
2018
nice.
vintage here was mild. And so all the wines just show restrained alcohol, elevated acidity. Here's Amel Orrego, the winemaker. And, you know, kudos to him because this is just, you know, delightful Pinot Noir, and it's the complete package to me.
It's
And Evan,
beautiful
you know more
fruit,
about this
Tim.
place than I do. So thoughts?
Just
Yeah,
beautiful.
no, I think it's a lovely testament to the quality of what's going on in Pinot Noir today. You know, Pinot Noir from Chile and from specifically from Greater Aconcagua, whether you're in Casablanca, whether you're at San Antonio, Lleida, wherever, is really about elegance and restraint. And your point about the vines getting older is a spot on one. And I'd say it was a combination of young vines and also just not a lot of material. You know, Chile has got one of the hardest quarantine things in the world. So they just didn't have a lot of choices of material to work with. Most of what they had down there was for sparkling wine and for basic stuff. So it was hard to make good still wines. Now with increased clonal variety, Dijon clones, things like that, and vine age together, you're able to make really good Pinot Noirs that taste, you know, that stand up to the great Pinot Noirs from other places of the world. And it's interesting because it's at once sort of decidedly new world, but maybe it's the vintage, to your point. You know, there's sort of an old world je ne sais quoi about it. But Amel does a really good job. He works with a gentleman by the name of Byron Kasugi. He's sort of like their consulting winemaker who used to be the winemaker for Saintsbury. They do some pretty good Pinot Noir a few years ago too. So they've always specialized in Pinot from the get-go. And to me, it's probably the strongest variety that they make.
Yeah, cool. All right.
All
Tim,
right,
you're
so
on wine
yeah,
4.
we're on to wine number 4. So again, let's take a look at the questions. What does the depth of color tell you about the possible grape variety? What are the important non-fruit aromas and flavors? And then what is the level of tannin, again, tell you about the possible grape, okay? All right, with that, let's take a look, and there's quite a bit of depth of color here. In fact, I would say this is opaque ruby with a little bit of purple and with kind of a fuchsia rim. And not only that, there's a little bit of staining of the tears, right? And in terms of the tears themselves, the alcohol level, it is high. Okay, all right, so we're expecting a substantial wine. On the nose, again, I'm going to start with the fruit just being by color and category. So this combines a couple of different fruits with maybe a drive-by of a third. We've got predominantly red fruit again, and much riper here. So things like strawberries, red plums, some sour cherries. And then we've got dark fruit, really ripe blackberries and black cherries, and black plums too. And maybe even a drive-by with, I almost said schnozberry. For all you Willy Wonka fans, not true, but boysenberry, so something riper. I just wanted to see if anybody is, you know, Willy Wonka.
I
Okay.
remember schnozberries.
Okay, yeah, and then other things, non-fruit things. There's definitely rose petal, fresh roses, maybe some lavender. There's some also ripe orange here, like Sevilla orange. And it's not only the peel, but it's the flesh. Some other herbal things going on. Things like, oh, there's once again, tea leaf, but it's a much stronger black tea. There's tarragon, maybe a little basil. There's mushroom again. And kind of there's ginger, there's something spicy. And there's also fennel. And who is it? I want to go back to the last wine. I think it was Maria said there was one thing in the Chilean Pinot Noir, and Maria, I think it was fennel that I picked up right away. That maybe is it for you. I don't know. Anyway, back to this wine. There is definitely an earthy character. There's like a dark mushroom, earth, soil, almost compost component. And then on the palate, there's a little bit of mineral too. And then in terms of oak usage, it's mixed, is really low percentage of new oak here, maybe 20%. Most of it is used. So there is light spice. There's things like, it's like bitter coffee, chocolate, and then the skins of walnuts. Yeah. And then if anything, I would say there's once again, some whole cluster and also some stem inclusion. And then to confirm a lot of that on the palate immediately several things. Number one, it's earthy. The wine is really profoundly earthy, and it's minerally too. More oak shows up on the palate, especially in the back. It's toast and smoke and light spice, and then the structure, okay? So the alcohol here is elevated, it's high. I would say there's probably 14.5. There's more tannin, medium plus. The acid though is still elevated. Salivary glands are working, and for me, that's medium plus. The finish is long. The wine is complex, medium plus and beyond complexity. So again, what's interesting about this is that this is kind of walking a tightrope between really ripe type fruit and alcohol, but also you still have some restraint. You've got elevated acid. You've got a wine that's just this other side of medium plus tannin. So this is a very curious wine. And with it, here are your choices. We have Pinot Noir, in which case this would be a really ripe style of Pinot Noir, or Pinot Noir from a warmer vintage. And always keep that in mind. You have Sangiovese and blend, obviously from Tuscany in Italy or thereabouts, and then Grenache blend, probably from southern France. And okay, so there you are.
Cool. We've got a lot of cigar spice box, spice notes, and maybe even a light sparkle on the tongue. Tim, you get a little prickle, high acid, or no?
No. And the acid here is medium plus at best. Unless you've got added acid, a wine with this much alcohol is going to have, medium or medium plus acid. Yeah, that's about it.
I do see people very firmly in the old world, at least 88% right now. What do you think of that? That's pointing people to the old world.
Well, this wine is really earthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
well, let's see where people are.
Go back and taste the previous, Pinot Noir and see what you think, because that wine was un poquito earthy, as we say here in New Mexico. But this is like on a scale of 5 to 10 times earthier. It's really
I like how Bill recognizes your coat now, Tim. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So
Bill,
here are the results. We're at 44% Sangiovese and 50% Grenache. Tim, how do we help folks out here?
All right. So, usually I don't key on color, but I'm going to hear, because Sangiovese is red. And not only that, it's a grape like other Italian grapes that shows oxidation even when it's young, which means there's going to be garnet in the color. The other major thing that's missing here is grape tannin. So even in a simple Chianti straight ahead wine, you're going to have grape tannin in the front of the mouth. And that's missing here entirely. Okay. Grenache blends, possible. What's missing for me is all the pepper and the savory and the soy sauce and, game and things like that. So anyway,
all right, so let's find out.
What does that leave us with? So everybody remember when I mentioned Pinot Noir as a possibility, I said if it was Pinot Noir, it would be from a warm place or a warm vintage. And I even think about something like Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot Noir that often looks and smells like this without the earthiness. Okay, let's see what we have, ladies and gentlemen.
Goodbye, Chile.
Goodbye to Chile.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a long flight.
Yeah, it is. And here we are. We're going to stop in.
Dramatically.
I like how Silka has slowed it down at the very, very
Yeah.
last moment where you're hoping to see what it is.
Right.
And she's really slowed it down. Nice work.
Okay, we are in Burgundy, of all places. And I know everybody just got dangerously excited, but hang on for a second, okay? So we are at Domaine Tollebeau. And Evan and Maddie, I don't know about you, but I've used their Chory Le Bon, this wine, on more wine lists than I can count. Because even back in the day, you know, this wine was one of the best values going in Burgundy, right? And Chory Le Bon is a tiny little village. It's to the east of Savigny-le-Bon and north of the city of Beaune itself. It's small. I mean, entire acreage under vine is maybe 1,000 acres, if that. It's really small. Tollebeau as an estate goes back to the 1880s. Francois Tollebeau began planting vineyards then. His son, Alexander, in 1920, married Aurielle Beau. And obviously, they created a new estate, Pinot Noir entirely, right? And over the generations, and literally since 100 years, they've acquired more vineyard property and a little bit of vineyard property in Corton. So they make some Grand Cru wine. But this is the wine that they are known for, Chory Le Bon, and literally there are very few producers making wine from this appellation. To me, it's always been a little bit rustic and bullish and rich, not the most elegant and refined Burgundy you can find, but certainly one of the great values. And yeah, all right, so now that everybody's getting dangerously excited, vintage 2020. And I remember the 2020 vintage, you know, a couple of things about it. It was pandemic year, right? But also the year started off normally. It was a really mild spring. There was some rainfall. And then for almost the entire summer, it was hot and we were drought conditions. And oddly enough, that year, most people picked Pinot Noir first before the Chardonnay. And the harvest started in the second week in August. So it was really early. And people were concerned about, you know, the Pinot Noir getting raisinated and overripe. And so they picked it early. But still, you can see it's really ripe Pinot Noir from Burgundy and very rich and atypical. We wanted to underscore atypical. But I'm sure that Evan chose this wine because, you know, it's a great example of a well-made wine in a climate change challenged year. But it also shows you style-wise what's happening to Pinot Noir. So think about these two Pinot Noirs. Yeah, that we have this elegant, refined, restrained Chilean Pinot Noir, and really what, you know, is almost like a middle linebacker of a Burgundy, if that's possible, you know. So anyway, but just this is a great, you know, topic for discussion, and it shows you where the wine world is going. Okay. Yeah,
You've got a lot of comments
about
here.
the color.
Yeah, the color. You've got comments here about the elevated alcohol, and people saying that I should have gone with my Pinot guess.
Right. Well, you know, by process of elimination, you know, all the savory stuff wasn't there for Grenache, and there wasn't enough tannin and grape tannin and oxidation for it to be, you know, Sangiovese. So, but it was a tough one. I'll absolutely give you that. If somebody gave me this, I would have gone, oh, it looks like Malbec.
I'm going to give the floor to Evan. I think Evan needs to say something.
No, I was just going to say, for those of you who were with us a couple of kits ago, you remember we did a Fizan from Mounieret. And if you remember, it was also from the 20 vintage. You remember, you know, Groundhog Day. We had a very similar conversation about this. And I think that this is important just in, you know, trying to understand the world as we know it. And climate change is real. Climate change is happening. They've had, you know, the last 5 vintages, probably 2 or 3 of them have been like this. And they're going to be more and more like this over the next decades. And there's going to be a point not too far down the road where it may be too hard to get those sort of elegant Burgundies there. And the Burgundies that are there are going to be more like this, more like Russian River, more dense and all of that. And that will just be, it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. And I think it is important, very much along the lines of Wine One. It's important that you know what's going on in the world of amphoras and alternative vessels. It's also important that we embrace the reality that the world that we know it is true. Yes, I think Burgundy purists might not like this style, but I think even if you tried the bigger gross from the same year, they're like this too. So this is just an interesting thing. And you remember we did this a few kits ago where we did a New World and an Old World Chardonnay, Patson Hall Burgundy and Fonchagnolo high-end Mâconnais wine, also just to sort of show you the world there. So it's not unusual for Evan to put two of the same grape side by side, so you can do it. And I'm sure a lot of you probably just were by process of guessing, thinking that, well, we just did a Pinot Noir, it couldn't be another Pinot Noir. Dismiss that, follow the evidence, follow the Colonel Mustard with the wrench in the conservatory approach, rather than simply, you know, trying to overthink it going, Evan would never do that, because I would not, I would do that.
Evan, I want to interject also. What I'm grateful when we do a wine like this is because it shows you that Burgundy can do this. I mean, it would not probably not be a wine that I would give you if you were preparing for an exam, but it was revelatory to me when I started seeing the 2020s and seeing this kind of density of color, because I didn't think it was possible in Burgundy. So good to know.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
No, it's like Chablis that tastes less like Chablis, Sancerre that tastes less like Sancerre. I mean, the world as we know it is changing. Anyway, in the interest of time and wanting to give Madeline enough to speak on her wine 6, because I'd never like to shortchange Madeline, because she's a good friend and I just wouldn't want to do that. Let's take a look at this wine. Interestingly enough, the color is similar to, but perhaps quite not as opaque and dense as the wine we had before, but it does suggest a similar pattern of youth. It's got a sort of day bright, moderate to fuller, but probably I'd say medium level of concentration. The color itself is sort of ruby. It's fading out to a lightly more faded ruby at the edge. The viscosity, kind of moderate-ish. They're rolling, yeah, moderate. And no tearing on the wines. Let's go into the nose and then into the palate and focus on those few things. So first of all, do I get fruit? Yes, I get fruit. The fruit I get here is probably, again, a combination of red and black fruit, but probably leaning slightly more on that same side as Tim's last wine, kind of a riper side of red, but nevertheless black fruits there. What I'm not getting here is a lot of sort of flamboyance in the fruit. So there was clearly definition of a beautiful fruit. If I was looking at this back in the comparing it to like a photograph, if a lot of the wines we've had before have been glossy prints, this is a matte print, right? It's not, doesn't just have the sharpness there, but the fruit is there. It is cherries, it is black, it is raspberries, a little bit of strawberry, but a lot of raspberry, maybe a little bit of currant on this wine, maybe a little bit of red plum there. And then as you move to the black fruits, probably more blackberry, a little bit more of that sort of black currant cassis type thing going on. Floral elements as well, picking up some sort of lavender and violety, more sort of that purple blue floral thing, maybe not so much rose. And then the herbs kick in. And here what I'm getting is a combination of like a strong leafy character, whether you want to call it bay leaf, whether you want to call it maybe a slightly chicory character, maybe you want to call it tobacco, something like that. But there's definitely sort of a leafy green element, not purely herbal, but actually leafy that's there. As far as, yeah, tea could be a good call also. As far as wood go, if there's wood here, it's sort of in the back. It's probably more for just holding the wine, probably larger, but I wouldn't even say it was there. I mean, nothing really suggested to me. I'd say that either there's a large component of stainless steel or glass-lined cement or something. Wood just isn't playing there. And the nature of fruit's not even really showing that oxidative. So I'm going to amend that and probably go back to stainless or glass-lined cement. And then anything else going on? No real nuttiness there. It comes off quite youthful to me. And structurally, which we'll measure in the palate as well as echoing back the fruit and other flavors. Flavors that go back, actually even more savory in the palate than it is on the nose. You know, if you compare it to the Pinot Noir that we just had, which was really sort of, again, lots of nice fruit, excellent fruit and herbal on the Chilean wine here. This wine here is increasingly just savory. It really is about the leaf character with the sort of more less ripe elements or ripe fruits. So it is more currant, it is more plum as opposed to berry. It's a much denser character there. And structurally, acid I would say is medium plus. Tannin I would say is medium plus leaning medium, not super hard tannins. And then I would say probably the texture is round. The oak on there, nothing to speak of whatsoever. And the finish on the wine, medium plus. I can still taste it. What are our grape choices here? We have Dolcetto, our little sweet friend from northern Italy. You have Cabernet Franc solo or as a blend. We have Pinot Noir. Would I give you 3 Pinot Noirs in a row? You never know. And then, of course, we have other. And then you can hit the regions there. You think about the grapes, think about what Dolcetto is. You have usually ample color, very soft, very bright, lots of sort of just sweet, juicy fruit. Cabernet Franc, depending on what it is going to be a little bit in the leafier thing. Pinot, I guess you probably are feeling like Pinot could be schizophrenic at this point versus vis-a-vis the things that we have here, but also softer tannins. And then your choices for territory, we could be in Italy, obviously with Dolcetto. We could be in France with Cab Franc and Pinot Noir. We could be in New Zealand, primarily for Pinot Noir. And although there is a little bit of Cab Franc down there, although mostly used for blending. We could be in Washington, probably for Cab Franc. I haven't seen, except, no, the only Dolcetto I've seen in the Northwest was in Oregon, and not much Pinot in Washington either. So your choices are there. And then there's the other. And if you're feeling really like, Evan, I want to talk about this, vote in the other camp, and we can talk about that.
Evan, do you get any egg, sulfur, or truffle?
No, I'm not getting truffle. Possibly, again, that's sort of an earthy character, maybe a soft mushroomy character. To me, the earth here is probably more about turn dirt and composty sort of earth with maybe a little bit of underscored, actually kind of almost like a chalky character to it, but not necessarily egg. Egg suggests to me either reduction, which could be coming from winemaking or an anaerobic wine process where they really mitigated the amount of air exposure that the wine had, or it could be excessive use of sulfur, which would literally give you a rotten egg type thing. I'm not picking that up in this wine. I am picking up a lot of just savory element in this wine, but again, sort of in more of a tobacco leaf, bay leaf vein, and sort of a matte character of black and red fruit.
Yeah, I can tell you that we have a 50% on Dolcetto and a 44% on Cabernet Franc, and some of those folks did fall for your, are you sure I didn't do Pinot Noir 3 times?
Just a couple people. Well, let's talk about it. What is Dolcetto? Well, Dolcetto literally means the sweet little one in Piemontese dialect. And those wines tend to be very sort of, Beaujolais-ish, Gamay-ish, even without necessarily the tutti frutti bubblegum, but in that sort of sweet, bright vein, transparent tannin, and deep color. Again, sort of bridging on at times the Beaujolais thing, depending on how much whole cluster they're doing, but a lot more top heavy. This wine doesn't, to me, come off. This wine has more of that mid palate, and again, a lot more savory elements. Pinots probably would still show a little bit more fruit. So I'm thinking our friends in Cab Franc land might be happy when they see what we have here. So where could we go? And we are decidedly old world. So, and that's a good
very
thing.
much
Really
so.
Structurally as well as flavor profile.
All right, so let's see how old world we are here.
So let's get on our plane, and we were in Burgundy. So we were clearly in France, kind of in center France, and we're going to get on the equivalent of, I don't know, actually you can't even take a interior flight plane in France anymore. It's now illegal to do so. You could only take planes if you started somewhere else. So we're going to take a train, and we're going to go to the Loire Valley, and we're going to go to the central Loire Valley, and we're going to go specifically to an area called Chinon. And if we are in Chinon, we are in heart of soul of Cabernet Franc land, as we know that Chinon, the central Loire Valley area of Chinon, and then Bourgogne on the other southern side of the river, as well as down in France, in Bordeaux, France's Bordeaux area, are really where you're going to find the benchmarks for Cab Franc here. What is classically Chinon and classically Cab Franc about this is this element of, again, sort of very leafy, very green, with sort of, again, this sort of matte, almost dusty character of black and red raspberry kind of fruit. You do get the sort of herbal elements, but again, I always say it's kind of like biting on leaves. That's usually what it is to me. And then you throw in that layer of dark fruit on top of it, and it speaks to Cab Franc. The question about pyrazines, some of them are more so than others. This one to me is not a particularly pyrazine one. This one, if anything, maybe it's structured a little bit more like a Bourgogne where the fruit comes forward, but they don't all have that super duper thing. Oftentimes the Cabernet Franc, that character comes off as leaf green as opposed to pepper green. So it really depends on the ripeness and the interpretation and the intent of the winemaker. Clearly here they're going for that, again, that sort of dustier element of fruit and all of that. So who do we have here? Not Tolabo, but we're next at, and we did our thing here. So we are again in Chinon to show you where. This is the house of Paul Buisse. And Paul Buisse is a good central producer. They're based in the Touraine. They do make a handful of wines. They make a lovely Sauvignon from the Touraine as well. But the wine on this one is classically Chinon. This is the family that makes it, the Chenier family, bought the winery some time ago from the Buisse family that started it in a long time. The Cheniers have been very active as producers, negociants, as well as their own wines in Central Loire for a long period of time. 4 generations long. That's Monsieur Chenier on the far left-hand side. That is the winemaker who unfortunately remains nameless. I couldn't find it on a website. I couldn't find it on the internet, and they appear to want to keep him opaquely in the clouds. But nevertheless, the Cheniers, I think, do a lovely job. It's got a bit of graphite in it, maybe as well too. A little bit of violet, but again, that sort of leafy thing. Tannic structure on this wine, I would say, is probably in the round area, but it's got some. It's just beautiful. It's delicious, and at the prices of the high-end Chinots from Augarafo and all those people these days, this is a very affordable, very spot on, and dare I say, very benchmark Chinon and Cab Franc. So this one's like one you can hit the save button on, put it upstairs, and hold on to it for Loire Valley Cabernet Franc, because it's a real nice example.
It's amazing. Once you know what it is, it's like, oh, but of course, and this is one of those that I feel like I'm really kicking myself. I must be very tired because
yeah, well, you've had a long, I know for a fact you've had a long week, but it is very classic. And I just am applauding, because I think that, the prices of Chinon these days are, bordering on going up into the atmosphere. And here's somebody, again, probably because they're a larger producer, they're negociant, that is doing it. It's just done a lovely job, for this punches above its weight in Chinon land.
Absolutely. Awesome. Maddie, we're all the way out to wine number 6, and it's
Yay.
yours.
And I got to tell you, I've been out of the restaurant game officially for a while, but I still put BTG next to wines that I think are very by the glass.
This is a by the glass.
And
yeah.
This is just beautiful Chinon, because sometimes the pyrazines can be verging on obnoxious. And here it's just enough. I always think of green coffee. And by the way, the importer on this, it's very interesting, is Cape Classics. If you think they're just for South African wines, they did branch out some time ago in surgical fashion to France. So that said, and you know what? I don't mind being shorted on wine number 6, because we always gain steam, Evan, and wine 1 takes a little while to warm us up.
It was a difficult wine 1. It was a difficult.
No, it was exotic. And then I'm still with, I don't know as I'd agree with Tim saying that acidity is high, but it's definitely medium plus. I'm going back to it, and note to self, go back to your whites after the reds, they pop.
Yeah.
So let's see what questions we put up here. Define the oak influence on this wine. It's because it's interesting. Not necessarily a tell, just try to be surgical about it. See if you pick up what kind of, if any, earth, particularly organic, and try to define the quality of the tannins as opposed, in addition to quantifying them. So that said, we've been putting a big punch on color today, and I love it. This is staining the glass, but I wouldn't call it, it's lightly opaque. It doesn't look like a monster red that's blue-black. It's a true, very dark ruby red. And what's interesting to me is the density and the hue holds to the very rim, and there's a little bit of purple in the rim, which always tells us what? That it's young. Aromatically, that, what leads right here, what dominates even in the most attractive way is just beautiful red fruit. And take your pick. Red plum, there's certainly a plumminess to it. Red raspberry, red cherry. On the heels of it, there's a dark element too. So black plum, punching up the red plum, blackberry. And then on the heels of that, very fresh lavender and rose petal to me, but especially lavender and violets maybe too. And then the earth element, rears its little head almost immediately in the form of mushrooms. And also, the gardener experience where you're digging out there, especially these days, and you get this combination of dust and fresh soil and leafy quality. And there's a spice element that I'm defining as licorice aromatically. And there's also a cool element aromatically to this. It could be mint, it could be the alcohol, I'm not certain. The oak definition to me on the nose is perfectly integrated. There's a vanillin sweetness to it that just melts into that ripe red fruit, and I find it very attractive. There is oak spice in the form of sweet, cinnamon, and maybe a little bit of exotic sandalwood. Exotic seems to be my buzzword today. I'm going to take it on the palate. My personal tasting obsession these days is mid-palate. I really, in addition to chewing, I just like to hold it. And I get this plum line of flavor, and it gives me personally an indication of quality of fruit and vine age that, doesn't betray you usually, or at least not me. Everything I perceived on the nose is reflected on the palate. It strikes me that this wine is remarkably balanced, unlike my number one wine, which was, a disconnect aromatically and flavor-wise, but it worked. This is like seamless. There's the perfectly ripe red fruit, buoyed up by a little bit of black fruit. There's the florality, like crunching on, some lavender leaves. There are the shrooms. The earth expression to me is more organic than inorganic, but I tend not to get too precious about it. The oak is even more integrated on the palate than it is on the nose. So I really admire the use of it. And, there's a nuttiness to this wine that comes in the form of a teeny little bit of bitterness, AKA walnut. I would say the tannins on this wine are very interesting because they are medium plus, but they are, not bitter. They are cleansing, but on the fine grain side. You can taste the wine through them. Going back to the nose is actually swelling. It's a young wine that is expressing itself more and more as it sits in the glass, and it's in my glass for pushing 2 hours now. So perfectly ripe red fruit, very integrated oak, a strong expression of organic earth, plenty of spice that both seems to be fruit spice and wood spice, and terrific balance. Medium plus acidity too. It's refreshing. To Tim's point, I like to, touch my my throat and my chest also in defining alcohol. This is, pushing higher alcohol. This is, I tend not to put a number on it, but this to me is medium plus, verging on high, but it absolutely works. And I think it gives the wine mouthfeel as well. So we need to do the poll quick like a bunny, Linang. What do we have? Tempranillo blend, Sangiovese blend. There's poor old Pinot Noir. No, but that grape variety's name is traumatizing everybody.
Yeah, you're gonna get somebody a fourth time. Maddie, would you consider this texture round, grippy? Like where?
Well, it's very interesting because the tannins are significant. I define them as medium plus, but I would say that there is a plush texture to this wine. That it is, and I think it will increase as it ages because it appears to be quite young. So I think it is smooth. Also, don't forget, this is the fourth red we're tasting, and your palate goes, got it, we're doing tannin. So it tends to be less dramatic as you go on. So let's just get Pinot Noir out of the way, and let's get considered.
Maddie, do you get a meaty aspect to this? Maria is asking.
Hi Maria, thank you for being as expressive as you've been today. I don't, if you're thinking of like smoked meat, lamb chop, char, that type of thing. I don't really get it in this wine. Nor do I get a kiss of horsey leather Brettanomyces either. I think the wine is remarkably clean, and I'm not getting tags of pepper spice on smoked meat, if that's what you're asking. But again, I'm one taster, remember.
How
So-
about Shiraz? Why is Shiraz not on this list, do you think?
That's a great question. We should have done Shiraz instead of Pinot Noir, so you can blame me for that, because visually, you can blame me for that. I should have subbed Shiraz in there instead of Pinot. Go back to the poll from, oh no, I can just do this off the top of my head. So Tempranillo and Sangiovese are the age-old struggle. You can add Nebbiolo in there. I think oftentimes Nebbiolo can be gotten out of the way by the fiercity of its tannins. Tempranillo blend, Sangiovese blend, and we put blend because quite often these grape varieties in their historic birthplaces contain legally and in practice other grapes. Can't wait to hear what other is. So we've got Spain, Italy, California. Now, what's very interesting to me, I'm getting no American oak tags, and I'm not saying anybody's wrong about Tempranillo. I'm just saying it's very interesting to me. Also, I will say one thing in terms of Patel personally, I think I said fresh 2 or 3 times. I don't get dried fruit on this wine, which generally speaking, I tend to get on Tempranillo, even when it's a lighter expression like a Rosso di Montalcino or just a Chianti Classico. What's that?
You said Tempranillo, but you meant Sangiovese.
I meant Sangiovese. Sorry about that. Thank you. So I'm not getting American oak tags, and a lot of people are using French oak in combination with American or exclusively these days on Tempranillo. And on Sangiovese, I generally get more of a dried red fruit expression, like dried red cherries. Michigan, no cattle's up north. No wonder they went down to,
I have to throw this.
Lots of cherries. Mm-hmm.
I have to throw this in before we go to the tour, and I'm going to go to the tour because I had the same problem that Jerry had. I thought it was a Cabernet, that might be really dumb on my part, but it was big for me.
It's big. It's a big wine.
Jerry has this Cabernet from Margaret River, maybe. So how did we not get that right?
Well, I think that's actually a very creative way of looking at it. Thank you, Jerry. The only thing I would say is that usually Cabernet, and again, look at the color on the Pinot, usually is not always. Usually Cabernet Sauvignon to me will be more black fruit dominant, quite simple. And I think the tannin will be a little bit more four-square and slightly edgier. I don't think it's a wrong call. I can understand why you would say that. The Margaret River Cabernets have an elegance to them and an inclusion of red fruit probably that makes sense. So where are we? We just moved from France to the Loire Valley to Rioja. And we are actually in Rioja Alavesa, which is, the topmost part of the region. We are a producer that is, gone slightly rogue. This is Artadi, who, if you look at this label, doesn't use the word Rioja. They have opted out of that for whatever reason. They don't want association with that appellation. I think the quality of the fruit they're using, and they're based in a township called LaGuardia, but they also source fruit from multiple villages in this area. I think this is just glorious fruit. I really do. They are at pretty high altitude, up to 700 meters. Ergo, and you have that influence coming up across the mountains from the Atlantic, correct?
Mm-hmm.
They're getting ripeness. I don't know when they're harvesting, but I loved what Tim said earlier. When you get this combination of prominent acidity and complete ripeness, it just means long hang time, right? That growing region can do that. This is actually a 2019, but it comes off younger to me, which is very cool indeed. It is 100% Tempranillo, and it is 100% French oak. They do not tell us how much of it is new. But that's okay, because, you know, we can determine that with our palate. It doesn't dominate it. These folks were established in 1985 and have since branched out into other regions, Navarra, Alicante, and more. I think, frankly, it's very rare that I get to taste a Tempranillo from Rioja that has Zippo American oak on it, and that's educational for me. I think the quality of the fruit was just beautiful. And if I were to struggle with anything, and I'm just curious what my compatriots feel, I don't know as I would struggle with Sangiovese on this one, mostly because this has a ripe red fruit character, not dried, as I mentioned before. If anything, I might consider Merlot because of the red fruit dominance. I don't know as it has enough green elements in it in the form of herbs and such. And I think the tannin structure is different, but I just think it's beautiful wine. We're 5 minutes over.
That's okay. I'm gonna tell everyone who had questions that we will answer questions at the happy half hour. If you have to go, we're sorry that we are running a little over here, but Madeline is at the end of the wine. And I have 2 questions here that will carry over to the happy half hour. And just to close, for those of you who do have to leave, thank you so much for supporting Master the World. You will see that we have a webinar coming up on July 21st. I hope that you guys can all be there. It's 144A, and the QR code is updated to bring you to our webinar page. And of course, subscribers, you'll have this shipped to you very likely on ice if you're anywhere hot.